Good morning, good evening, great games at your table, as I used to say all the time. I might start saying that often again. Great games at your table. That's really what this is all about. I'm Jonathan Albin, Games Master's Guide, and I'm here to help you make your games the most excellent sessions ever. So today we're kind of inaugurating this more general tone because I've realized that I have my own roleplay game. Obviously, the logo here, Nykos, is the fantasy realm that I run my games in, and NycosRPG is the game that I've devised. And it's really more of a games toolbox that you could add onto any role-playing mechanism. But I don't really want to talk about that. What I realized is that my agenda, my personal goal in life, is to get everybody playing, and optimally to be playing role-play games. But I really don't care. I'm really about getting people to play because I get people playing. And of course, I'm being perhaps a little glib there because what I'm saying is that I get it. I understand why people play games and why people should do so. But I haven't been as strident at the message as I might. And I've had several discussions, and I don't know whether we'll have any viewers with which to have this conversation directly. So I'm asking you as a viewer, yes, I'm breaking the fourth wall to ask you to have a conversation with me through the comments section and give me some ideas of what I can do to help you have a better, greater games experience. I'm going to be also doing some one-liners. I've been working on sort of a theme I want to try out, and I don't want to be too glib with it, and so I'm wanting to kind of test the waters. But if you are familiar with what I'm doing, please subscribe to our channel, become a member of our Patreon program, and join us in playing on the weekends. We have games specifically designed for the people who become Patreon supporters, and I've made this pledge as sort of a challenge. I pledge that anybody who joins the Patreon program and gets connected up with Discord will be included in any of the game sessions that I'm running. So I currently have a Saturday 9 a.m. game and a Sunday 1 p.m. game. But if we added additional participants, someone asked whether or not I'd be able to handle it. And the reality is we would just add more game sessions. And I'm fully committed to keeping that going for as long as the channel exists. So if you are a role player with years of role-playing experience, or if you're brand new and have never picked up the dice at all, either way, you're welcome to join with us in those games on the weekends. And I heartily recommend that you do so because we have such a great time, and there's so many new developments that are happening because of it. Now, if you are a follower of the games that I run, you also should be aware that Tuesday evening I do Nycos Nightly News, and those stories are particularly the continuing sagas of the campaign groups that I'm currently running. And so as we add more players, that might, the number of sessions might increase, the number of sessions might increase the amount of lore. So there's kind of a push me, pull you to expand this further than we currently have it. And that means that I'm inviting not only my current player base, but anybody else who watches this video and wants to play in a role-playing game. Even if you've never done so before, the Nykos mechanism is really quick to learn. I'll be glad to include you. Now, in the upcoming weeks, I'm also going to start doing a bit of, if you will, creative, or they call it innovative deconstruction. I did make the effort so you don't have to of buying the 2024 Dungeons and Dragons Dungeon Master's Guide. And so I will be going through that with a, as my grandfather would say, a fine-tooth comb, and disseminating to you information about that game mechanism and how it may be changing the very play of Dungeons and Dragons, as well as offering some suggestions or recommendations. Hey-o! Welcome, Spina Chills. Am I saying that right? Spina Chills. Spine Chills. I don't know if the E is silent. Got a friend of mine whose name is Henry. He spells it He3NY. The 3 is silent. So glad to have you with us. If you feel free, Spine Chills, and anybody else that joins the channel, to ask any questions. The concept of the Game Master's Guide is that I have a panoply. I have 50 years behind the shield. I've been a Game Master nonstop. Spine Chills. All right. I'm getting it right. Yay. Welcome, welcome, welcome. And if you, with a name like Spine Chills, I have this, just a kind of an inclination that maybe you're into the horror goth kind of scene. Yep. I gotcha. Cool. So, anyway, what I was saying is that with 50 years of nonstop game mastering, I started GMing in 1974, literally 2 days after I played the very first time, and the game master was none other than Dave Arneson, my buddy's grandpa Dave. My buddy Darren's grandfather was Dave Arneson, one of the 2 guys that wrote Dungeons and Dragons. So I got to play it relatively early. My memory is a little bit faint on that, since it is 50 years ago and I was only 11 at the time. But if I recall correctly, I actually played with him utilizing the rules and the notebook that he had. There was no rule book yet available, and there were no graphic charts or pictures or anything. We simply were playing an encounter, a series of encounters in a wilderness setting. And there wasn't even any branding per se. It wasn't that we were in there was no narrative that explained what world we were on or anything. It was just simply start playing. And from that very first time playing, I was hooked as a storyteller and a game master. I was already kind of a creative kid anyway, and so from that very first weekend, nonstop for 50 years, I've been running at least one game session. And that was through my time in the military. I was married for 23 years. I raised children and was an air traffic controller. I've done a ton of different jobs along the way, eventually getting into the games business. Right. No, I remember the years because 74 I was 11. That's how I know it was when it first came out, because I was born in 63. Quick math, 74 would be 11. And the AD&D books were the first books I owned, and I didn't really own I got the DM's the Player's Handbook the month that it came out, the Monster Manual 3 months after it came out, and the DM's Guide a year after it came out, because my folks bought it for me. But I really didn't need it because I was already, by that time, had already built my own lore mechanism. As a matter of fact, early on, I didn't even have polyhedral dice. All I had was standard 6s that I stole from our Yahtzee set. And so I had to build bell curve graphs and everything to try to explain how combat worked. But, you're 11-year-old, you're playing games with your friends. Who's really keeping track? But throughout that entire time, I've played every iteration or every edition of Dungeons and Dragons. I've played every published RPG up until 2010. I was the marketing director for Gamma for a bunch of years, so I worked with every publisher, US and Canada, for role-playing and card games, board games, miniatures games, all forms of tabletop. And then I was also the marketing director and then eventually the tournament liaison for the Yu-Gi-Oh! Trading card game, and I did that for several years as well. And between those two experiences, ICV2 magazine at one point uh, called me the best connected man in the games business in an article. And oh, that's excellent. That's excellent. The books. Matter of fact, I still have mine. They're now all marked up because, of course, I put tabs on them and I put stickers in there, and I colored all the pictures by hand when I was a kid because I didn't think about the eternal value of a book in pristine form. So, therefore, it was the uniqueness of the books. There's an entire story to that. As a matter of fact, my book bag was stolen in, oh God, I must have been 80, no, I remember. Must have been 83 or 84 when I was at a games event and the bag vanished. And 5 years later, I saw one in an early bulletin board, and I bought it from the guy over the internet way back before the internet was really a big thing. And lo and behold, when the book got there, it had my mom had made me one of those wood stamps, so you can put an image inside the book, and so that player's handbook still had my stamp and my name inside of that book, even though I bought it after I'd moved twice and was far, far away from where the book was. I actually ended up getting back my own player's handbook. So, fun story. But what I'm going to be doing with the Game Master's Guide channel is actually kind of identifying my real role in life as being the guy who's going to guide games forward. I've said before, and I'll say it again, I want to be the game master to the world. I have, in my life, run so many games groups. A friend of mine and I calculated out, and it was like 12,800 or something like that people whom I have directly taught to play role-playing games. So, don't remember if he played while he was in the service. Oh, that's fair. Yep. I when I was in the military, actually, it was the first time I was actually way before my time because I was a professional game master back then because I was getting paid to be a storyteller. And the way it would work is in those days, the modules were coming out fast and furious. It was in the pre-D20 glut. And so although there were only 2 or 3 publishers, there was TSR who made sanctioned property, and then there was Judges Guild who made a ton of unsanctioned property, and then there were a dozen or so other smaller publishers that would make basically cast off and throw away. As a matter of fact, one of the first modules that I made any money on was Keep on the Borderlands, and the way it would work is the modules had a price range of about $5.99, I think, per issue. And so I would hold a tournament on the weekend, and I would run 3 games sessions of that particular property, one right after the other. And I would fill up on 6 to 8 players in each. And then I would charge them $5 each to play. But the winner would get the module and the set of dice I used. Now, the dice were at that point really kind of cheap to get, and the module I paid $5.99 for, as you remember. And now I've gotten to run it 3 times, so now the story's burned into my brain. So I don't need the module anymore. So therefore, giving the module to the winner was literally the person who killed the most monsters, earned the most experience points, etc. And so it was for a weekend, I would get 24 players at $5 a piece, and then paid $5 for the prize, which I then gave away. So, needless to say, I was rolling in money pretty much and running games on the weekends while I was in the military. Oh, you mentioned that my son was in Desert Storm. My boy was actually Desert Storm. Yeah, he was involved. No, he's too young for Desert Storm. He was in Afghanistan after we started the war there, and then he was also in Iraq. So he was in both of our conflicts, and just 2 years ago or so, he finally got to retire and was U.S. Marine Corps, 11th Corps. And so he was injured in both fields of battle, so he got hit in Iraq and in Afghanistan. He was always in a dangerous place. So, oh, honor to your father for his time in the service. So my time in the Air Force was in the week in our. I was in the rocking chair, as my grandfather would say, because I was after Vietnam and before any of the Desert Wars, and so I basically skated for, and literally as well as figuratively, because I also am a roller skater, but I skated through between the two, and so I'm not what they consider to be a protected member of the military, because I didn't come in after the new GI Bill, and so therefore I was kind of caught in the middle. But the evolution of roleplay over time, in that I've now remember where I was. I was talking about my early professional RPG time, and so I ran that way for several years. Now, at this time, I had seen information on the RPGA, the national organization that was like the equivalent of the union of game players, but I didn't put a lot of stock in it, and I was further in the West. I was in Kansas, Colorado, Arizona, Texas. So I didn't get back east, so I didn't know of or pursue any of the conventions in I didn't know about Gen Con. I didn't hear about Origins. I was oblivious to what they now have organized as organized play. But in 1992, now we're jumping way forward. Now we're talking about 3rd edition 3.5. I'm here in Southern California, and I've been playing in local events at the college level. One of the colleges nearby held a tournament. We went over and played in that, and that was fun. But then we realized that the high school groups in the area also were trying to host events. And we reasoned, perhaps rightly, perhaps not, that it would be more enjoyable for the people who were in high school to actually play in their own event than actually write it. And so I wrote a multi-stage adventure with multiple endings, which was kind of my personal bugaboo about the tournament materials, because almost always the tournament materials became the modules, and the modules would provide a reward system that was based on the players hitting the beats at the specific times that were built into the design. And now I had a problem with that, because games groups should be able to pursue whichever direction they want to go instead of being bound into a course that they have to pursue. So my adventure that I wrote had multiple endings. You could solve the puzzle and save the hero, or solve the puzzle and help put the villain to death, both being the same guy, all depending on what you took from the clues in the evidence that was established in the adventure. So by having done it that way, by having it be a multi-dimensional game, it drew attention. And I have to say that the Redlands, California high school was really Johnny on the spot, because they were able to get a reporter, and I still remember his name, Mark Muckenfuss, was the reporter who came from the Redlands paper and interviewed us. And in that time, as we wrote the adventure, I still remember, because in the article he misspelled my name. The one thing that I gave him one of my business cards and said, make sure you don't misspell it. He still found a way to make my name John Albion instead of John Albin. But nonetheless, the article was really well written. The other irony is that although it was a fantasy adventure, the only pictures that his photographer took were of a Star Trek tournament. And so the irony is that Star Trek has a big role to play in my role playing experience in just a couple of years after that. So this had to be 88 when we ran the local tournament in Redlands. And you could probably go to the microfiche in your in local library or whatever and find the article. And I probably should, because I had a copy, but long ago it got destroyed. Yes, Mark Muckenfuss, Muckenfuss. I know a little bit of German, but I have no idea what that name means. But I still, if I met him on the street, I'd probably even still recognize him, because it was my first time ever getting the quote 15 minutes of fame as an adult. Of course, therein lies another story. Way back when I was in grade school, after I'd started learning to play D&D, I entered our school's spelling bee, and I won the spelling bee hand down at the local level and got to go to the Kansas state competition. And I got beat out by a word that I will never forget from this point on in my life, and it means having the condition or pertaining to wheat. It doesn't have to do with baking or anything like that, but it's just the very nature of the material, and that is the word farinaceous. And again, my memory is like this was yesterday. The word farinaceous, if I had been clever enough to recognize it, the word farina, Farina, is the word for the grain that we commonly call wheat. So being farinaceous comes directly from that. So the word is Farinaceous. I got it in the actual spelling bee. I spelled it right, except when I started to sound out the first letter, I have a bit of a, I wouldn't say it's a condition, but I sometimes pronounce things backwards because my brain is running ahead of my mouth. And so therefore I was trying to say F and it came out F. And because I said the sound, the person who was judging it would have expected me to say correction and then restate the letter, but I didn't. I said F. I said Fi, and went on to spell it. And so they thought that I had put the letter P on the front of Farinaceous, and so I lost. I was in 12th place at the time. Breaks my heart to remember that, but oh, cool. Cool. Nice to meet you, Handy Litany. That's awesome. And I know the last part does. Muckenfuss, I believe the first part means to be in mire or whatever. I think that our word muck comes from that. I'm not certain, but it's Muckenfuss. And yes, Fuss, the last part is foot. So, little foot, dirty foot, whatever you want to call it. But I'm sorry you got caught in an ad. I'm not really sorry, because ads are ultimately part of the way I generate revenue. But, add a quick note, if you subscribe to the channel using a subscription, you no longer get commercials. So just realize that that's one way you can help the channel, is to subscribe to it. When you subscribe to it, yeah, it does require a few dollars, but then you get commercial free for the rest of forever. So just think about that. But so I misspelled Farinaceous. So that was when I was a youngster. Andy Warhol had made his comment about every person has their 15 minutes of fame, and my parents thought that me making it into the Topeka Journal as the 12th place finisher in the in the state spelling bee after winning the local competition and the county competition was like the best I would ever do in my life. And so even though my mom, I have to say my parents were the archetypical superhero fans of Jonathan Albin, and so they believed I could do anything. But in that point in my life, they really thought that was my 12 minutes of fame. So now I'm in the newspaper as an adult writing this adventure for the high school event. And then the guy Mr. Muckafoo said, hey, are you going to be going to OrcCon? And I looked at him kind of funny, and I said, I don't even know what that is. And so he explained about the conventions, the convention cycle, and how Los Angeles had a major event basically pretty close to every quarter, 3 a year, and that I should consider going to take my talents and go and run an event there. So that would be, I guess you would say that was really the stepping stone from going from amateur. I mean, I got paid, as I said, to run tournaments. I did charge, I didn't directly charge my players initially, but instead I always demanded as the game master that they bring us snacks and they bring our meal or whatever. So myself and my kids and my wife would get basically free meals on Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays, because my games groups would show up and would bring pizza or tacos or whatever. So I as you can see, I'm still a pretty big boy, but I was back then I was a growing boy. I was in the Air Force and was constantly fighting with the chunky chicken program. Anybody who's in the military knows what I'm talking about. I was wrestling with my weight the entire time. But so I was running games 3 nights, sometimes 4 nights a week, just because of the love of the game for the most part. I did get involved with a couple of the game stores. I ran some localized events for them, not ever getting back to that level. But when I found out about the conventions in Los Angeles, that changed everything. Because the very first time I went down, I went on a wing and a prayer. I knew that they had some kind of a policy. Somebody had mentioned that there was some kind of a policy that if you ran a certain number of game sessions, that they would give you crash space. They would give you your badge for the event, and they would provide you basically access to their snack room. So I went down, and without knowing anybody, I walked up to the counter and said, I'd like to run games for you. And I took that same module that I'd written for the high school and now brought it here and ran it every 4 hours for all night, Friday night, into Saturday and Saturday afternoon. The requirement, I wasn't clear, but the requirement was to run games for at least 6 players. I'm sorry. Yeah, games groups of at least 4 players 6 times or 6 players 4 times. So they need you to work basically 16 hours out of the entirety of the convention. So the convention started mid-afternoon on Friday and ended on late afternoon Sunday. So really you had almost 72 hours. But out of the 72 hours, you're running for 16. And then once you run for the 16, then you have only the remainder, but you have to sleep, right? In theory. So running this adventure and getting enough players to fulfill it wasn't difficult. As a matter of fact, once the second group played and came out with a different result from the first group, I actually did something you've probably never seen happen before, and that is I had players come back who had already played through the adventure, now wanting to play different characters in the same adventure to try to find the other solution. And that started a bit of a buzz. And so that led me to start thinking. And the biggest challenge was going to the convention was the very first time in my life. I mean, here I am, 23, 24 years old. My first child is on the way, and I am going to the games convention, and I meet miniatures for the first time. Oh my Lord. It was a weather change. I yearned to be able to go and actually play miniatures games. I was completely enthralled with this. Was in the early days of Warhammer, not the 40K version, but Warhammer, the fantasy game. And there was 18XX being played there. For those of you that are savvy, you'll know what I mean when I say 18XX. That double X doesn't mean anything other than the years, because the game was set up to play for pre-ammunition and post-ammunition. So it was spears and Hittites, Hivites, Jebusites, all the ites charging at each other across the field in chariots, all the way to the Civil War. And shortly after that, even into the Boer War and such. So this was all newfangled and flashy, and gosh, I really wanted to be a part of it. And so I finished my run of games, but then I started to do the calculation. And I got to thinking, what if I could run one game session, but I could accommodate 4 teams of 6 players each? Isn't that the same? One session, 4 groups, 24 players all at once? Doesn't that count the same as 24 players across 6 or 4 games groups? And I was able to convince the people who ran the event that would be the case. So in 1991, I believe it was 1990 or 1991, I made my first appearance with a system that originally was called Virtualities, but because there was a movie coming out of the same name, we changed our concept name to Parallels, and a new phenomenon was born, and that was ultra-large scale events played by teams of players dedicated to the solution of their portion of a multi-dimensional logic puzzle. And each group was given instrumental clues that would solve their own puzzle, as well as be clues that would help other groups solve theirs. But each group would depend on the others to get those clues and have to figure out how to determine which clues were relevant to their part of the story. Which meant now I could run 4 separate teams. And this is where the Star Trek comes back. You see, I had seen the miniatures game that had been played there, and at the time there was this really cool property that had just started selling at Toys R Us stores, for those of you that remember those, or Kmart's and that kind of thing. Again, if you remember those stores, well before the modern phenomenon known as Walmart's, or even there were some Target department stores, but they were far more clothes related at the time. And so these toys that were being sold were called micro machines. And micro machines are, for game purposes, exactly the right kind of scale and resilience you need to have to use with a really large games group. Because the models, if somebody steps on them, they're not going to hurt them. They're not going to destroy them. So I therefore started to run these multifaceted Parallels games. And the very first one was called the Kobayashi Alternative. And I took the mechanism of the Kobayashi Maru scenario from Starfleet Academy and derived it considerably. I don't want to give any spoilers away, because all of you that are watching this right now will want to have an opportunity to play it, so I don't want to give away any of the ultra secrets of it. But the issue is that you have 4 teams of 6. Teams are made of a tactical officer and an advisor to the tactical officer, a administrative officer and an attaché to the administrative officer, and 2 runners. And the 2 games, there's actually set up as 2 games. The administrators are sequestered to one room as if to say they're on board a starship, a mutually agreed to planetoid or whatever, and therefore they are administrators and cannot depend on seeing any tactical, physical readouts of the conflict. Instead, they have to trust information being brought to them from the forward commander who is playing the TAC officer. Therefore, with 4 teams and 4 sets of riddle clues collections, they were interacting. And I also devised for the system a diceless mechanism so that we didn't have to wait for a series of random dice to determine success failure on any action. And the mechanism was called the hierarchy of command, or HAWK system. And so the hierarchy of command mechanism allowed us to handle the resolution of conflicts relatively quickly. And so the dynamic of the war games portion of the game was very fast paced, a lot of ship moving hither and yon as they're trying to get into position to lock phasers on each other or whatever. And at the same time, deep diplomatic negotiation, working at a diplomat's table and only getting a break every so many minutes to actually kibitz and make negotiation deals away from the table. I had stolen a little bit originally in concept from the idea of the classic game diplomacy, friend killer game diplomacy. But the difference between that and what we were doing was radically different, because it was, as I said, hierarchy of command for the tactical portion, and the diplomats literally had carte blanche to, they literally could take their entire sheet of information and make it available to the other teams, but that would not be any fun. So instead they had to decide which information they were going to buy or trade or whatever. And so the 2 games ran at the same time. And at the end of the first session, I was done. Here it is, Friday, first night, 1 4-hour period. I've run 6 groups, 4 groups of 6 players each. My accommodations are done. Tomorrow morning, I can play miniatures all day long. I forgot something, and that was the players really liked what I did. So here I am going to the miniatures table, rolling up my sleeves. Just bought a new set of dice. I'm ready to sink into it. I've done my role play for the weekend, and as I literally pick up the dice to roll my first attack, who should appear but one of the Romulan commanders? And he looks down at me and says, "That game you ran last night, could you run it again?" Well, wait a minute. I want to play miniatures here, but you're asking me about playing that game that I did last night. I had a good time with it. It was a lot of fun, but I already, kind of planned on playing miniatures all day. So I didn't want to disappoint. So I said, well, I would do it, but I'd have to make sure that all of the player slots were filled. I wouldn't do it for less than 24 players. He says, "That's okay. I've got 28. He had already gone back down, talked to roleplay headquarters, coordinated for the space, coordinated to get players together, and had them already do a pre-sign-up without any approval from me. Well, now he's committed me. They've asked for me to run the game, and he's got all of them standing there waiting. Okay, I guess I won't play miniatures. Maybe I'll catch a game of miniatures this afternoon." So at 9 in the morning, I'm running another full series, but this time each team has more runners, so it made it faster and more fluid, more dynamic. And as soon as we finished, players were already telling me, "I want to run again, but this time I want to be the Klingons. This time I want to be the Federation. So I want to be the X Factor." "But you already know the story." "Yes, but it wouldn't happen the same way because I know stuff now. And so therefore it won't happen the same way and I'll be able to defeat the enemies. I said, yeah, but we got players coming back from other games too. It didn't matter to them. So I ended up running again at noon, and then again at 4, and then again at 8. You can see where I'm going here. At the end of that weekend, I had gotten to spend exactly 0 hours playing miniatures. I still was admiring of them, but I had now run a full panoply of adventuring slots for a game that I invented, but I couldn't sell because it took 24 players, generally speaking, to play. But I was now hooked. Getting to come to the conventions, they treated me like a king that first time, and after that it was even more so because now I was bringing with me a known event, a desired event, and players were actually registering in advance of the convention to make sure that they had seats at the table when I would run those games. So I said all of that to say this. As a game master, with all the years of experience I have doing it, I really want to help you become the best game master you can be and help your game master, if you are a player, to raise the level of his game into the stratosphere as well. So I want to thank you for being here. I'm actually 10 minutes over my usual bracket for these events, and I will be back at 10 a.m. tomorrow and again at 11 p.m. And that goes for every day of the week, Monday through Friday. And we also have live events at Board Game Paradise in Redlands, California. If you're in the Southern California area, head into the city of Redlands, go into downtown, and on the corner of State Street and Orange, you'll be just a block away from Board Games Paradise. It's on the main dragon on State Street there in Redlands. And we're there from 6 p.m. until 10 p.m. on Mondays and Tuesdays every week. All these times are Pacific time. And also we have a special event on Saturdays called Roleplay Roulette, which case I have a roulette wheel that you can see at NycosRPG.com. You can spin that wheel to get the concept of the different genres of events we might run. And then while my players are building their personas for that session, I'm also building the adventure for that session because the CIS, the Community Identity Sheet that I devised, is the fastest way to build adventures for game masters and storytellers. That was a lot. Check out more at NycosRPG.com. Thank you for being here today. Hope that you'll subscribe and follow us, and I'll see you next time here at NycosRPG. And thanks for listening to the Game Master's Guide.